I wanted to introduce something that I began over the high holidays, and that was the close reading of Genesis chapters 21 and 22. And what I felt personally during the holidays in general was my ability to take very small parts of our tradition and expand them as I saw fit, so they could actually go the way that I was taught to say this, from my heart to your heart, meaning a teaching could fully form within me and teach it to the point that it might be able at some level to form within you. And oftentimes in the past, I felt I had to get rid. The clock was ticking, the choir was on, we had to end by a certain time, and we're all doing our best to give a variety of things at high holidays. But sometimes I thought to myself, what I really want to say, I had trouble getting out. And because of the exigencies of being in Israel and not having the choir here, and basically having our dining room and our studio apartment for our studio, it just lent to the idea that I can just do that thing that I want, which is just teach with some great help by Abigail. So and we didn't get any complaints. No one said where was the music and where was that? I think people said they really missed it. They really missed what we ought to do, as do we terribly. You know, we did not choose this next version of Torah. In some ways, the state of California chose for us. But on the other hand, now that we're here, we're going to do our absolute very best with what we have, which I think is still really, really great. So what I wanted to do tonight, and maybe the next few Shabbatot, is introduce to you another chapters of the Bible, but this is going to be Genesis chapters 1 and 2. No hurry. Take my time you to access the depth of the Bible for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just extraordinarily beautiful. And oftentimes when we read the Bible, because the Bible is the Word of God, because the Bible is something we learned in Hebrew school or learned in church school that we have to obey, oftentimes is taught for reasons of salvation, reasons of obedience, not really as something of pure beauty that gets inside the inner chambers of the human condition. And once we allow the Bible to do that, we realize, as with all great literature, the Bible is about us. Now, for each person a bit differently, and not each part of the Bible will speak as much as another part of the Bible, but I wanted to at least give each of you that experience. So a few words just about Genesis chapter 1. Where did this text come from? It's always important to remember where the text came from. Now, so I want to say three things at the beginning. The fact that Genesis 1 comes before Genesis chapter 2 does not mean it was written before. In fact, once one takes out the questions of someone who is orthodox or fundamentalist that sees the Bible as being written by the very word of God, dictated by God, as it were, which I reject, and one sees and when one stops seeing the canon, meaning the specific order of the books of the Bible, as somehow dictated by God, which I reject, we can take that out. It's not that I don't like the canon. It's not that I don't see great holiness in the text. I don't start with what I call prior questions. I try to study the text as if it were just published yesterday. A person who knows Hebrew knows some allusions, but not read it with their deot kodmot, the prior ideas filling the text. So when was the text written, and does that get us any help in reading the text? Well, the text is very clearly written by Jeremiah, sometimes toward the end of his period. And please go look up Jeremiah after we get off, because I'll be continuing next time. I want you to imagine yourself living in a crisis when the world is falling apart. Now, we definitely get that sense now. I think in my time, ever since President Bush was elected, people had said the world is falling apart, the world is falling apart. You know, I would say, well, it's not 1862, it's not 42, the world's not falling apart, the world's not falling apart. Well, for me, the world is kind of falling apart. I've finally been convinced. Uh, we don't know what's going to happen here. In this little corner of the world, you know, Israel has to respond to Iran for that 170 something ballistic missiles that were fired, the attempt to assassinate Prime Minister Netanyahu recently, the ongoing bombing of civilians that is not tenable for any sovereign state. And Israel has to respond. Maybe is responding right now as I speak. And none of us know what's going to happen, and none of us know we have to do it. I'm speaking now as an Israeli. As an American, I mean, either you support the country or you don't support the country. And I think the United States, my mind has said, we're an ally of Israel, you know, in for a penny, in for a dollar. We can't say, well, we only like you 51%, so we'll send you 51% of the weapon. We have to send the entire weapon. So I've never been here. I've never been with this many volatile stage actors, such as Iran and Russia and China, so bent on evil, so not caring of the nature of humanity or the nature of the history of the people, using proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah to further their number one attempts at just chaos, and number two to slowly push back Western civilization. I've never seen it as clearly with my eyes, and I've never seen as clearly the position of the state of Israel as the front line against this struggle. Israel cannot lose this war for the sake of Western civilization. The forces of Iran and China and Russia and others must be stopped. That means young men die. And that's the other very sad thing about being Israel right now is young men train, young men gain skills, they go up north, they go down south, and a number of them every week die and they don't come home to their families. And it's incredibly sad every week. To a person, the soldiers leave videos or of wills behind, and they say, "This is where I want to be. This is the war that I need to be in. Please don't feel that I didn't want to be here. I want to be here." So there's a sense of number one, incredible pride, resilience, tragedy since October 7th. We see the pictures of the abducted, the pictures of those who have been killed, of a diverse society, but bent on the idea that we are simply not targets of missiles, of proxies of Iran, which we have been for past several years. They want to shoot targets. We sit here and take their targets. We go in, we disrupt a couple of sites, we go out, the rocket starts up again. The question for the people of Israel, do we just take this forever? Do we take being the victims of enemy targets shot randomly forever? We have good air defenses. It's not hermetic. But there's a certain point where a collective people, for all their diversity, just says stop. So this is a tough time. It's a very tough time. And in this tough time, there are beautiful things being written, really beautiful. Even by the bereaved families, things are being written. The comedy is getting a little bit edgy. Yes, people are able to laugh during this time. So I want you to try to mention, at least over here in Israel, life has become condensed in tragedy. We really don't know what's going to happen next, other than all who live here are going to live through it together. And we're going to try to see this through, and everybody has hope for a brighter future if Israel and the United States can make it not worth it to the enemy to continue to try to massacre innocent people. So I'll put that aside. Generally, what I mean is there's some times in time called tough periods, and tough periods produce its own kind of beauty. Tough periods produce their own kinds of beauty. I wanted to bring forward just an idea on how to read the Bible, the song Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. Uh, One reason is I heard it when I was a kid, too young to hear the song, but like a lot of people, I heard the song when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Didn't have my defenses up, and I read it, and it broke my my little 10, 11-year-old boy heart. I had an auntie, and I saw my auntie Helen. Um, my Uncle Sam was well. He died of a stroke. I saw my mom's sister. She was my great aunt, and I thought, wow, and Auntie Helen's going to die. And I had been in England, and I had seen these quaint little churches, and I could just see the whole thing. A lone woman gaining meaning in life by not waiting for the janitor and picking up the rice. I can just imagine the priest of the old church that no one went to had to write his sermon anyway. And I listened to the song and I got the whole terrible sadness of people living out their lives, but not ending their lives. They're going through their lives, and eventually they'll be died in a grave where no one came. And I was enough of a budding existentialist that the poem just spoke to me. There's something in the human condition, in the lyrics, in the way that it's sung, in the music, and the song just touched me. Something like um, the ode to resilience in the face of existential emptiness, something like that. I was already a budding existentialist, but the song never went away from me. And but I know that as a young person, and still this very day, when I sing to myself or I listen to Eleanor Rigby, I am brought into the sharp pain of the loneliness of the human condition. And that's one of the powers of song. A song rightly sung, rightly arranged with the right music, the right lyrics. The lyrics are very short, but the song is powerful. In the same token, when we look at the Bible has passages like this that are so sharp, so acute, that you're brought in to the human condition. And once we're brought in with great sharpness into the nature of the human condition, the only question on our minds becomes, well, what now? Now that we know this, what do we do? So we don't read the Bible as a book, we study the Bible as a poem, and we try to get at the poetic depths of the Bible. Well, Genesis 1 and the verses in chapter 1 are so often misread and misunderstood. I wanted to take a chance and give you some of that acute literary psychological depth so that you have it, and then we'll go on with chapter 1, and you'll see that we have in front of us is not a myth, not a the Jewish version of an ancient creation story, but something much, much more than meets the eye. So first of all, in the first few words, this is something you've heard before, but I'll read it again now. We do not read the text Bereshit bara Elohim. That's just an incorrect reading. Grammatically, it's impossible, and most of the commentators don't read it that way anymore. The text is Bereshit baro Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Bereshit baro Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, which means in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. Now, why is that important? Because I was taught incorrectly that Judaism has a theory of creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing, which is not bad as far as axioms of a religion goes, but just not accurate. So the Bible is not trying to claim that reality came from nowhere. The Bible seems to say, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth were unformed and void, and then all of this happened. Is not making a claim to creation ex nihilo. So in my mind, all the Jewish theologians who want to mention that one of the tenets of Judaism is God creating the earth out of nothing should just read the text very carefully and just love the text for a while and see what the text says. So when it says Bereshit bara Elohim, is that an allusion to anything? Is that an allusion to anything? Well, now we're going to get a little bit subtle. So just hold on. Once we take the Bereshit Bero, in the beginning God created, to Bereshit Bero, in the beginning God created, now we're going to break that part a little bit better. What about this word Bereshit? The Hebrew word Bereshit means begin, in the beginning of. The word Reshit requires the word of. So there's a class of Hebrew words. If you just want to say at first, you say barishona. If you want to say in the beginning of, you say Bereshit, which requires a noun next to it. Reshit requires a noun next to it. So Reshit plus noun. Reshit plus noun. That's what we're looking for. It just so happens the only other time in the Bible where you have the word Bereshit plus a noun is in the book of Jeremiah. What is Jeremiah describing? Jeremiah is describing the various kings that lived in his time. Bereshit, the kingship of King so-and-so. Bereshit, the reigning of King so-and-so. For Jeremiah, it was a regular way to say, in the beginning of the reigning of a certain king. In the beginning of a reigning of a certain king. It would be like to hear, once upon a time. You know what comes next. In the beginning of the reigning of a king. So in a way, Breshit means there's going to be a sovereign. There's going to be a king. Something that a sovereign does is at hand. So we have, of course, is Bereshit Biro Elohim, not the king reigned, but the king created. Bereshit Biro Elohim. At the beginning of Elohim, establishing the reign of Elohim. And the question is, establishing the reign of Elohim, where and why? The establishing of the reign of Elohim, where and why? It was already there. The universe was already there. It just didn't have a sovereign. Well, this is the time, this is the moment when we have in the beginning of Elohim's creating the heavens and the earth. One last little side note, this word bara. Most of you know that the word bara, bet resh aleph, is only used in terms of God creating. There's no one else in the Bible that has the verb bara next to the person. However, the word bara is a shoresh, is a Hebrew shoresh. And when we go to the Bible and we look at the book of Joshua, chapter 16, 15, we find another very interesting use. Now, it's not the word bara, it's the word bireh, but from the same root, bet, resh, aleph. So here, bet, resh, aleph in bara means create. Bet, resh, aleph over in the book of Joshua means to clear out a forest. Now, because in Joshua, the term means clear out a forest, that brings in the meaning here. Because when you see where Elohim is creating in our verse, Elohim is creating in an area of tohu, vavohu, and darkness, unformed chaos and darkness and the abyss. It's a really, really scary landscape. And so when we ask where, well, in the book of Joshua, they've gone into a dense forest. They're clearing it out for human habitation, and they're using the exact same word root to describe God's creative power. So what new information do we have? Not only is it, as it were, a sovereign being crowned, as it were, for a mission to clear up this mess of pre-created reality, is like going into a field and making room for human beings. That's what's happening in the words Bereshit Bero Elohim, in the beginning of a sovereign's clearing out reality. In the beginning of a sovereign's clearing out reality. Now, what is this reality? Now, then we're told in the next line. It says, V'ha'aretz, and the land, not the shamayim. So already we have here the dividing of reality into hashamayim, which is the higher realms, the untouched higher realms, and ha'aretz, which is the degraded lower realms. The lower realms have become utterly chaos. So read what the text says. V'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, v'choshech al pnei tehom. The land, probably meaning material reality, was tohu vavohu, v'choshech al pnei tehom, was unformed chaos, with darkness over the face of the abyss. Now, these are clearly terms to create feelings. When you have terms like tohu vavohu and darkness on the face of the abyss, it's supposed to create something inside of you. I think something like horror, something like emptiness, to say that it's you just try to imagine a howling wasteland, everything tohu vavohu, everything chaos, everything unformed, and there's darkness, and it's hovering over the face of the abyss. It's supposed to be frightening. You don't want to live there. Now, interesting thing is, Jeremiah is quoting himself. Jeremiah is quoting himself. You cannot read Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 without reading what of Jeremiah's own words he's quoting. So in verse 2, Jeremiah is quoting Jeremiah chapter 4, verses, I believe I have four, either 2 or 3 or 4 and 5. So if you have a Bible out, go with me to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 4. Go with me to Jeremiah chapter 4. So Jeremiah is way in the middle of your Bible. He's after Isaiah. And here we have Jeremiah chapter 4. Empty. This is Jeremiah speaking about his own time. I saw the land, and behold, it was void and empty. I looked to the heavens, and their light was gone. I saw the mountains, and they were trembling, and all the hills had crumbled. I saw, behold, there was no man. All the birds of heaven stopped moving away. I saw, behold, the fertile field had become a wilderness, and all its cities decimated before God, before the burning wrath. Verse 27, the entire land will become a wasteland. Okay. So now, when you look at these words from Jeremiah, chapter 23, we can look at in Hebrew. He says, Ra'iti et ha'aretz tohu vavohu. I saw the land tohu vavohu. In Jeremiah, I saw the land behold, I saw the land, behold, behold, I looked and behold, it was void and empty. So he's using the exact same words to describe what he saw in his own time. So Genesis 1 is about what Jeremiah saw in his own time. It's very, very important to know. Genesis 1 is what Jeremiah saw in his own time in Jeremiah 4. The words tohu vavohu are used in Jeremiah 4:23, the same words used in Genesis chapter 1. In fact, in Jeremiah chapter 4, he says, I looked to the heavens and there was no light. Of course, over in chapter 1, God creates light. So Genesis chapter 1 is a commentary on Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. Okay, very important to know. Genesis chapter 1 didn't happen at the beginning of the Bible. First, Jeremiah wrote Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, and then he wrote Genesis 1. So what is Jeremiah complaining about? What is his song about? Well, when you read Jeremiah, what you're reading is the story of a man living during a time when everything is falling apart. Foreign enemies are invading. A local ally has deserted. Life has gone upside down. Jeremiah himself is being arrested for speaking God's word. He's been put in prison. Everything is falling apart. And from Jeremiah's perspective, the world is completely collapsing around him. I don't have a straight analogy for you, but I've read many stories where the end of history does seem near, where people have acted in such a way where things are finally completely falling apart. I want you to imagine that that is the world of Jeremiah. Now, whatever you've read in history, whatever books you've read in history, go back to those pages and try to imagine what it felt like for a person knowing everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart. Now, Jeremiah goes through all of this and he ends out on the other side, but he's clearly suffering here. So the words that he used to suffer here, now again, we don't know any for sure chronology. He then writes a poem about the beginning of creation. Okay, so this is the third step we have to consider. Jeremiah wrote a poem about the beginning of creation when he was going through arguably what was his worst crisis as a human being, when his own society, his own culture was falling apart. He writes a poem, and what he says in this poem is, It's always been this way. It's always been this way. He writes a poem, which is an overture to a creation story, sets it aside, and eventually, when Jeremiah, in my mind, is the person who edits the Bible, the first editor of the Bible, Jeremiah and his school of thought take this poem and put it at the beginning of the Bible. That we have to understand. Genesis 1:1 is not there because it is the beginning of the Bible. It's there because it was put at the beginning of the Bible to let us all know what the Bible is about. To let us all know what the Bible is about. Now, here's a conflict that can sometimes happen. You read Genesis chapter 2 and you start reading it in light of chapter 1. Well, that's not a correct way to read it because chapter 2 existed centuries before chapter 1 had been read. So now my open question to you, now that you know a little bit from just reading Jeremiah chapter 4, why did the author, Jeremiah, who ended up not only as a poet, but as the editor in charge of the Bible a few years later, why did he choose to have his own poem placed as the first poem in the Bible? What was he up to? Okay, it's an open question. What was he doing by making it the first chapter in the Bible? Y'all can think about it for a minute. Sherry.
Perhaps because he was living in a time of such difficulty and despair, he was trying to write something hopeful, and he was trying to give order to the chaos that he saw around him. He was trying to give everyone a way out so that they could believe.
Yeah, so beautiful. So in this poem, not only is there tohu vavohu, but there is a creative God. Where in Genesis Jeremiah 4, where he says there is no light in the sky, the God in Genesis chapter 1 puts a light in the sky. So you might say at the beginning of time, the end of time was fixed, meaning our time can be fixed because this end of times feel it was how the beginnings of time was created, and it can be recreated. Anybody else with a image on why Jeremiah 4 is placed at the beginning of the Bible? Okay, okay, a few more thoughts. Not very far from what Rabbi Manning has said. Uh, um, um, Shanti, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yes, Rabbi, and I see Randy has their hand up too.
Okay, but go ahead, Shanti, then Randy.
Uh, to me, it is a story that for each of us, we need to build a sovereignty over our own lives and our own travels that go sometimes into the abyss and sometimes into paradise, but that we're always in the process of the beginning and creating and maintaining that.
That's very good. And before I go to Randy, I think every spiritually oriented person has felt this tohu vabohu with him. We've all felt this unformed void, this darkness hovering over the face of the abyss is part of what I think it means to be a spiritually sensitive people. Again, I have to share with you, when I was a young person and I felt this unbearable pain within me, when I would come to these parts of the Bible and I knew that this person knew this pain, it was a relief for me that I wasn't alone in this. And therefore, I somehow think that one reason this is in the beginning of the Bible is that the author is setting out, this is what it feels like to be a human being. This is the set of the human condition. You all need to know is this is where we all come from. Randy, you have a comment?
Yes, sorry, I was having trouble
Sure.
unmuting. So thank you. It's beautiful. Love the comments. So what I was thinking about in terms of what we've been talking about in Genesis 1, that if it's part of the story is creating of the Sabbath, then it's so important during times of chaos, like what you provide for us, is this Sabbath where we can connect with the divine and connect with our soul and our purpose to get through these tough times.
Yeah. Yeah. The Torah Tuesday class knows that this is actually not a story mostly about creation over chaos, but rather the insertion of time in chaos. In a way, it is the justification of the 7-day week. And you only find out that out at the end. People knew things came into being. They didn't know it happened in 7 days and why there's a 7-day week. So one of the hidden agendas of this story is the cosmic creation of the 7-day week. And Zena.
I was thinking of birth, that when you're inside the womb, there's this darkness, you don't have the consciousness of even knowing at that point. Or we don't know, but they have the consciousness of knowing what is inside, and all is dark. I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. This meditation on the darkness inside the womb, and the child does not know what will be out there.
And then what it focuses on when it comes out, yeah.
Okay, so ha'aretz, meaning the material world, was tohu vavohu. Hoshech was al pnei hatehom, the abyss. Again, I think this is a world to create a set of feelings. We don't know where this abyss was, but it was there. And then it says, a ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei mayim. We're not exactly sure what this is. A spirit from before God. It certainly tells us already that God has some kind of counsel. There's some kind of legions that God has. And a spirit, as it were, is sent out to hover over the face of the deep. And this spirit seems to have some kind of creative power. Once the spirit is down there, Elohim is able to do something about it. A Ruach Elohim is hovering over the face of the water. So now we know there is darkness, there's an abyss, there's water. Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or. So going back to Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, he said, there is no light in the sky. Now there is. Yehi Or. Now here's a very interesting thing. It says, Vayar Elohim et haor. We talked a lot about this in class because it didn't say that God created the light to be good. I heard the famous Jewish commentator ask, why did God create the universe? And the commentator said, to create goodness. It's a good enough answer. I don't know if it's accurate, because it doesn't say that God created the good light. God noticed that it was good, which brought us back to our Euthyphro conversation. And those of you who will remember it, does the good exist separately from God? Meaning, does God like it because it's good? Or is it good because God likes it? That was the question in the Euthyphro. It's a question that has never gone in the way in the history of theology. Well, this text seems to say God created something and noticed it was good. And it seems like the goodness came from the divine, and then the divine notices it. It's as it were, God did not involuntarily create something good. God created light and then saw that it was good. And it separated between light and darkness, and God called the light, he called the light day. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom, lachoshech kara laila, and it was one day. So now we have day and night beginning, which is the first overcoming of the tohu vavohu, but it is not yet the world that we understand because there are no sun, moon, and stars. So it goes on to create the sun, moon, the stars, the continents. All of this is coming into being here. The main thing, of course, is that the moon and stars are there to keep calendars. Now, another strong emphasis you'll see here is the emphasis on the calendar. I mentioned in the class that by the Second Temple period, a strong part of the priesthood was the concern with the calendar, and we'll see this retrojected back onto the Jeremiah, who was a calendar. And here's the reason. And again, it's a hard thing to communicate in a time that is not like this. We actually do live within a spiritual reality. Now, the best I can do for all of us is we live inside of something called the government. Okay? It's probably the largest thing we all live in, that we have no choice, but we're inside of it. And, there's the end of the year, the beginning of the year. We can decide when we want our year to be, but the government will tell us we live from January 1st to December 31st. That's just the way it is. We know that our taxes are due on April 15th, right? If you're not going to turn it in by then, you got to make an extension. Now, why? What made those days those days? Well, the legislature. So when you're born into the United States, you're born with an operating calendar. And the operating calendar tells you some very important things you know about your lives, which is where to pay your taxes. As my dad used to say, someone would say to my dad, "Are you certain of something?" And he would say, "The only thing I'm sure about are death and taxes." Okay, so death is a cosmic event, and taxes is an event that is put onto reality. Now, let's say you're one of those wondering, seeking human beings that I talked about in my Shabbat thought, and you look up and you say, "But why? Why is a full moon in the sky once a month? Why is the two harvest days exactly 6 months from each other? What we call Passover and Sukkot are exactly 6 months from each other. Full moon on both days. So we know there's something cosmic going on in the spheres, that the stars are moving on their appointed course, that they finish the course in a year, that the sun is on a course, it finished its course in a year. I think for the ancient person knew that they were existing in an august reality, that they didn't know what it meant, but it was there and it was much greater than they were. I don't think we can overestimate what it meant to be a prehistoric person looking up at the sky and feeling there's an entire world intact, not of our doing, into which we were made, and we have no control over it whatsoever. In fact, we're minuscule compared to how great it is. It's very hard to regain that unless you've been out in the desert in pitch blackness and able to see the dome of the heavens. I had the luck to be on a ship coming back from Hawaii to the States in a time of pitch darkness, and I could see the dome of the heavens. But until I had actually seen the dome of the heavens in pitch darkness, I did not know what this meant. So I recommend to you, however you can, get out to the desert, to an area of pitch darkness, look up and see if you do not feel somehow overwhelmed by the majesty of the whole thing. And if you can stay all night to see this thing turn right over your head and see the moon cruise through the sky and then see the sun rise and make its circuit throughout the sky. It's utterly overwhelming, I have to say. I've only experienced this a few times. I'm glad I did, because I no longer take for granted what it means for there to be sun, moon, and stars. So for them to understand that the sun, moon, and stars are there for us to regulate our days. That moon is about our calendar. That sun is supposed to regulate our day. This universe has been made in a way for us to organize our lives. So going back to Genesis chapter 1, there's a cosmic realm that is directed toward to the human being. So that's what you're having throughout Genesis chapter 1, is the creating of this world that is for the human being to mark time. But not only that, the cosmic world, as you'll see more and more, need the human being to mark that time. So you'll hear the term a Mikra Kodesh with a Jewish holiday. Not only is the moon at a specific place in the sky at a given month, we are then told to make that a Mikra Kodesh. So it needs us to mark it in time. Now, this is a fascinating idea, that the universe needs the human being to be conscious of what the universe is doing. The universe needs the human being to be conscious of what the human being is doing. So therefore, the universe and human consciousness are brought in together. A few more words to say about that, but I do want to get to my putative end and then see what kind of time I have left. I want to get now to the creation of the human being, which might be the last thing I'll be able to talk about this morning. As God is creating all of the animals, God creates them and says, you'll see this in verse 22, Vayvarech otam Elohim lemor Pru Uruvu. God blesses them and says, Pru Uruvu. So the term bless seems to have a connection with Pru Uruvu, which means go be fruitful and multiply. Pru Uruvu, be fruitful and multiply, is used with the animals, is used with God, and quite oddly with the Sabbath. Now we're going to get to something quite mysterious. It comes to the human being. So you've heard the mystery of term, Naaseh Adam B'Tsalmenu Kidemutenu. You've all heard this, right? Vayomer Elohim Naaseh Adam B'Tsalmenu Kidemutenu in verse 26. Okay? Let us make man in our image. How many of you heard something like the royal we? Does that sound familiar? Like, why does it suddenly move to the plural? Okay, I heard that. I thought that. And then I discovered many verses, but especially 1 Kings chapter 20. Going to read you a very, very odd narrative. Okay. 1 Kings 22. If you have a Bible, you can go to 1 Kings 22. So one king is considering going to war against another king, but he doesn't know if it is going to go well. So he asks the prophet Michayahu and says, would you inquire of God to see if the planned expedition will succeed? Michayahu says, oh, yes, of course, God, it will succeed. He says, okay, knock it off. Don't make fun of me. I want you to really go find out if this is going to succeed. So now, take a look at 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 24. 1 Kings 19 through 24. Michayahu says, listen to the word of God. I saw God sitting on his throne, and all of the host of heavens were standing by him on his right and on his left. And God said, who will lure Ahab to go to war so he may fall in the battle of Ramoth Gilead? So God knows this guy wants to go to war. God knows who's going to lure him to go into this war and die because God wants him dead. Now, we know that God has the power to kill. So what is happening with the God in 2 Kings 22? He says, who will lure him is as if God's self can't do it. Now, of this entire host of heaven, it says the following. This is in verse 20. It says, Hebrew, Mi yefateh et achav v'ya'al v'yipol beramat Gilad, v'yomer zeh bacho, v'yomer zeh bacho. One says, do it this way. The other one says, do it that way. Like this. And then the Spirit says, this is in verse, hold on a second. Verse 21. Vayetze haruach vayamol lifnei Adonai, and one of these part of the divine legion called ruach comes before God and says, Vayomer ani afatenu, I'll tempt him. Vayomer Adonai elav bameh, how are you going to do it? Vayomer etze vaheti ruach sheker, I'm going to go out and become a spirit of lying. Bifi kol nevi'im, I'll just have all of his prophets lie. Vayomer tifateh v'gam tuchal tzeva sekem. Right, very bizarre story. There's nothing like it in the entire Bible. I don't know of any other parallel except for Job's chapter 1 and 2 that shows a divine council, God talking to a divine council, thinking up something to do, the council saying, yeah, okay, but we don't know how to do it. And one being raises her, I'll say her hand, and says, I can do it. And God says, how are you going to do it? And the angel says, I'll do it like this. God says, okay, go do it. Sounds good. Now, what is the name of that angel? Ruach. There's an angel named Ruach who says, I'll go do the work. So get the picture. The divine council meets. God wants the opinions of the divine council. They're not sure what to do. One of them says, I'll do it. The divine spirit called Ruach. God says, okay. Now reread Genesis chapter 1, where it says, the Ruach Elohim was hovering over the face of the deep, and God says, create. This brings us back to something that I'm sure had I read this, there's no reason I wouldn't have, I just wasn't very well read. Had I read this in Hebrew school and brought this up, somewhat poking fun of the idea of monotheism, that the Bible does not teach strict monotheism, that the Bible has angels and part of a divine legion, that Elohim does not rule alone, but has a divine council, and that Elohim consults with his divine council before he makes a move, and the divine council are actually the ones who make the moves. Now, if when I were in Hebrew school, I would have been thrown out for one reason or another for saying such a thing, but here it is actually in the Bible. So therefore, when God says, when it is said here, Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidemutenu in Genesis chapter 6, it is not the royal we. Elohim refers to both Elohim and a council called Elohim. Okay. Now, how can this be? How can one word refer to different things? Well, we use it all the time. We say Congress said. Well, Congress means the House of Representatives and the Senate sitting together. That's what Congress means. But Congress actually is not is an inanimate object. It does not have singular voices. So you can say so-and-so in Congress said, and if a person in Congress said, one could say Congressman Jones said, but instead the paper says Congress says. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's a shorthand metaphor. Have you ever heard the White House said today? Heard that? Yeah, well, the White House doesn't talk. I don't know if you knew that. It doesn't have any capacity to speak. So it's a metaphor that people use to say somebody in the White House said something today. So we have all of the English language where we use a shorthand to describe what people do. So when it says, Vayomer Elohim, try to imagine that meant the divine council was talking and had concluded, let's make a human being. This was the divine council talking, because as we see from Genesis, from the book of Kings, chapter 20, they talk about things before they do them. So it says, Vayomer Elohim, the divine council reflected and said, Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidemutenu. Let us create a human being in our image, in our likeness. And this human being will rule over, etc., etc., etc. Now, how does it happen in verse 27? Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. So now it seems that the divine council has voted, and they're asking Elohim, since Elohim is the chairperson of the committee and seems to have a unique kind of creative skills, you go do it. So now it goes from the plural to the singular. In the plural, it is Naaseh Adam. In the singular, when Elohim actually does it, it is Vayivra Adam. Notice Asa when it's the divine council, Vayivra when it is Elohim acting alone. So it says, Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. That he is Zachar and Nekeva. So Elohim creates the human being in a tzelem. The tzelem of Elohim, he creates him Zachar and Nekeva. So is the divine council both male and female? Are there male and female angels in the divine council? Quite possibly. So therefore, the human being has to be both male and female, because the human being is created in the divine image. Now, the last thing I want to bring up this morning is this term tselem. If you're a reader of newspaper, you'll hear there's an organization today called B'Tselem, a Israeli human rights organization that is claiming that all human beings are created in the divine image, and therefore Palestinians should be created as human beings like everybody else, and that the Israeli military and the Israeli police should respect their basic humanity. By the way, which I fully agree. I fully agree that everybody here should be afforded their full humanity as a child of God. I'm more reserved on the image of God because I've read the Psalms, chapter 39. So if my notes are correct, hopefully when you go with me to Psalms chapter 39, you'll find another part of Genesis 1 that has been brought in by a psalm that makes Genesis chapter 1 not quite as easy to read. So I'm jumping forward into my Bible in Psalms 39. So you'll go with me if you like. I'm in Psalms 39. Now, why I'm in Psalms 39? Because here's what I do. Whenever I read a word in the Bible, like B'Tselem, I say to myself, has that word ever been used before? And what does the word mean in another context? Because remember, we have a fixed vocabulary in the Bible. It's not a live language anymore. Therefore, every word that is used, you can actually look up every single time the word is used. And maybe a different time the word is used is going to have a meaning on how this time the word is used. So if we look in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verse 7, it says here, Ach B'Tselem yithalech ish, ach hevel yehemayim. Ach B'Tselem. So I'm looking at the English here. Only in a shadowy darkness does man make his way, but it is in futility for which they foil. He amasses riches, but he knows not who will harvest them. And now, what do I hope for, O God? So I'll read this again. Ach B'Tselem yithalech ish. Only in a tselem does a man walk about. Ach hevel yehemayu. He's like a vapory mist. He's like a moaning vapory mist. Yitzbor, he will accumulate. Velo yeda mi osfam. He accumulates, does not have any idea who's going to collect it. Now let's look at this rather carefully. The word tselem, as I've said before, has the root of the word tsel, which means a shadow. Therefore, image, as in a light on something, and on the wall you have a shadow. And so the ancient biblical authors were attentiveness to know that that shadow on the wall is a good metaphor for a human being. Now, why is the shadow on the wall a good metaphor for a human being? I'm sure there was some person who stood next to a wall and the sun was shining upon them, and they turned around and saw their own shadow. Some burgeoning existentialist said, is that all there is of me? Am I but a shadow with the light of the sun shining on my back? Okay, if you haven't thought that, don't start thinking this now. It won't do you well. But if you have thought it, I'll call you a dour French existentialist, which I was when I was a young person. All I am is the shadow on that wall. And when I go away, that shadow goes away. And that's the full substance of my humanity, my tsel or tselem. So go back and look at Psalm 39. Ach B'Tselem yithalech ish. A person is just a shadow walking around. Ach hevel yehemayim. It says in hevel yehemayim. Yehemayim has a sense of making a ruckus, shouting things, trying to call attention. So this author's images were a bunch of shadows yelling out because we can't stand the fact that we're just a bunch of shadows. We are going to come and go like the vapor, like the mist. We want to make a lot of noise while we're here. Doesn't make a difference. We are going to go like a wisp of wind. Okay. So Psalm 39 is not a psalm you read to your children for a bedtime story. If you're going to read bedtime story for your children, skip Psalm 39. Ach B'Tselem yithalech ish, ach hevel yehemayim. Yitzbor velo yeda mi osfam. He's going to aggregate, and he has no idea who is going to create it. We talked about this for about a half an hour in the Bible class. But so now when you have these Hebrew words, B'Tselem, B'Tselem, and here it means B'Tselem yit halech ish ach hevel yehemayim. That's the phrase. And then you have that taken all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. Who has probably read Psalms? When it says, Na'aseh Adam B'Tsalmenu Kidemutenu, the word Tselem is at best a strange term. What does it mean that the human being will be in our Tselem? That he's just a shadow while we're the real thing? And it tells us something about the human being. We are a shadowy figure, a shadow of something else, and we have no substance. Now, you don't get that from reading Genesis 1. You only get that from reading Genesis 1 in the light of Psalm 39. Okay, I have a few more things to say, but I'll leave that there and see if we have any comments up until this point. Israel, did I see a hand up? No? Anybody else have a hand up? Yes, Rabbi Manning.
Yeah, thank you for this, Rabbi. This is just so wonderful. When you touched on it briefly, and I just wanted to go back to a point that you made about those of us who feel kind of outside the mainstream and may feel left behind when people celebrate their lives and don't find a way into the Bible. And you say that this idea that Jeremiah wrote about was kind of like extending a hand to the existentialists in the world. There's a way in for you. And that's very interesting because this last week when we're celebrating Simchas Torah, and there's a commandment that you should only be joyous. What I brought to my group last week is, for many of us, this commandment to be joyous and only to feel joy makes us feel even that much more isolated and lonely if we can't participate in the joy. And so what I was thinking, since the rabbis in their incredible wisdom paired up the Megillah of Kohelet of Ecclesiastes with Sukkot, that they're saying there's lots of you who can't feel joyous in this Zman Simchatenu, in this time that we're supposed to feel jealous. Well, go ahead and read Ecclesiastes, which is very similar to what you just read from Psalm 39.
Uses
And
the exact
this
words.
way, those of us who really feel outside that whole mainstream area of joy and belonging have a way in, and it's almost like there's an invitation to the rest of us. And I think that it's incredible that the rabbis, I'm sure, saw this, and that's why they paired up the Megillah of Kohelet with Sukkot.
Yeah,
Or at
that's
least
very
one of the
likely, by the way. So Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, is the assigned reading during Sukkot for as is assigned Megillah, and Kohelet begins with Hevel Hevelim Hakol Havel, futility, futility, everything is futile. Now, why are they writing this? Now, this takes a very, very deep soul to say to people as they gather their mountainous harvests and feeling very full and feel very gratified and maybe even very wealthy, to someone to say, it's all futility. Don't believe that your wealth is going to save you from the fate of human beings. Live better, live differently. So as I shared many times, when I was in high school, I was reading an existentialist book that referred me to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 18. I'll read it to you. It says, I'll say in English, for with much wisdom comes much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases pain. Ki berov chokhmah rav ka'as, v'yosef da'at, yosef machov. So for a 17-year-old existentialist kid in pain who felt I just knew too much to live like, my friends who were living superficially, I thought this statement where someone just finally said it to me. With much knowledge comes much pain. You want less pain, reduce your knowledge, or just to accept the fact that great knowledge requires great pain. So as I've shared many times, this happened when I was 17 years old. From that moment, I felt I could read the Bible. I mean, before that, I knew I was Jewish. I knew I had a Bible. We had Torah portions. I knew all that, but I never felt a personal invitation to reading the Bible until I read that the Bible knew me, understood me, and can see me. That's number one. Number two, this chapter of the Bible starts with futility of futility, vanity of vanities, hevel, hevel, which then, of course, we find in Psalms chapter 39, which then connects us back to the word Selim. So there's an undercurrent that I'm trying to show you in the Bible, something of a dark existentialist undercurrent. So there's what I would call the heroic myth of the Bible. God created the world, God created light, and the undercurrent of the Bible that in Jeremiah's time, everything had gone out, everything was devastated, everything had fallen apart. And then Jeremiah, as it were, by writing that poem, is saying, can you start over again? Can you take this world of tohu vavohu? Can you take this world of darkness and can you regenerate the world? This is, in my mind, my recreation of Jeremiah's prayer to God. Start over. The tohu vavohu is too painful. And then when you see creates the human being, B'Tselem Elohim, and you read a little bit further. Part of what it means to be B'Tselem Elohim is to feel the futility of what it means to be a human being. You feel both at the same time. And I love Rabbi Manning's bringing this forward to this coming to the Sukkos and Shmini Atzeret just passed. There are times when you can't be happy. You know, I share the anecdote, you know, where a person is Finley, but that's, you know, that it's a mitzvah. You're supposed to be happy. I say, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I did a lot of work on authentic happiness and intentional happiness. You know, some days I'm actually just not happy. I mean, it doesn't matter what the Torah says. I'm just not happy. And then I say to myself, but it's written into the human condition. Who knew that? Jeremiah knew it. Psalms 39 knew it. All over the Bible. I say, these are my soul brothers, my soul sisters, all over the Bible that say, we know what it feels like, but don't leave us. Because if, you know, let's all read the Bible together. We will find enough passages together where we will be able to recognize the pain that we sometimes share. And from the wisdom here, we will be able to rebuild ourselves with each other. So that's my call to you. For everybody whose lives are happy, perfect, humming along, I'm glad you joined us to watch the rest of us who are dealing with the edge of human experience. But for the rest of us, I want to say, even reading the first part of the Bible as it should be read tells you that this author understood deeply the depth and pain of the human condition. As you go into other parts of the Bible, into Jeremiah chapter 4, into Psalms chapter 39, you are seeing literary geniuses at work that are not telling us everything they think when they start out. You want to know what these people think? You're going to have to do some research. And that's one thing I just love about this Bible, is that more you pour over it, the more you pour into it, the more grandeur and the more beauty it produces for us. All right, so let's take a deep breath there, and then I'll see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, Zena. I'm sorry, Ruth.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Your presentation made me think of something that I'd never considered before, about when you say that B'Tselem Elohim, and if God consulted with God's counsel. So suddenly the idea of community becomes really important. And I think that's one of the things that distinguishes the Jewish people, that the sense of community, that the first thing you do, you do a Chevra Kadisha to make sure no one will die alone, and you build a synagogue. And those are always the central things that happen. So that must come from the idea of a council.
Well, I want to caution you. I completely agree with you, but I want to caution. When we say the Jewish people versus other people, because other people have just strong of community. So I would rather us say we Jews have a strong sense of community.
No, I'm
Not-
not to the exclusion of other people, but I'm
I know,
saying-
but that's why it's just a little editorial comment on how we talk here.
Right.
Okay,
Right,
so
but also-
all nations have strong sense of community, as does the Jewish people.
But don't we point out that the Jewish people received the revelation together as a community, not as one person who passed it down? Isn't that really sensitive?
Yes. Okay. So we'll talk another time, but you see, the things we decide to focus on, only the Jewish people receive community revelation. It seems like it's comparing us to other revelatory traditions. And from my perspective, I'd rather us not do that. We can just say we receive the Torah in community. We don't have to talk about anybody else. Are you catching my drift? Anyway, putting that aside,
So, but I'm just taking, sorry, your
I know
example
you
of
didn't mean anything by it. I just want us to be aware of the
no,
nuances
I
of what
just,
we're
but
saying.
it was the council that was so
Yes. Okay.
fascinating.
Now the council. Yes, I don't think this speaks to community. In my mind, the divine council is a natural development in the idea of angels in the upper worlds. Remember, previous religions seem to have had gods at war, independent gods at war, with a chief god who is oftentimes at war with a junior god. You see this in Greek myths. I think that's pretty well known. But what the Hebrew Bible seems to think that there is a chief god, Elohim, with archangels or a divine councils or the legions of on high, where they work together to manage the universe. Now, I don't know if this is a reflection of community, but my guess is there were human communities before this idea developed. I think a better way to look at it, uh, uh, better than it's a is the development of community, that it is a theological development. It went from the angelic realm or the realm of the gods at war with each other to the divine council collaborating with each other, with notable exceptions. For example, the story of Job, where the divine council meets and the council member named Satan comes and really does something horrible with the divine council. They're all quiet, they don't say anything, and he's able to bamboozle the divine. When you look at the idea of the divine council in Second Temple literature, where it's a very, very big part of, for example, the books of Enoch and so forth, it's a fascinating idea. So the divine council is a biblical idea. It's a post-biblical idea, certainly rabbinic idea. I mean, angelology in the hands of the rabbi just explodes into an entirely new discipline. But I was not aware up until 10 years ago that the idea the concept divine council even existed. I read it, didn't pay any attention to it. Here I say, mea culpa. I was one of those persons that read it and didn't mean anything to me. Now that I see it everywhere. So, but again, getting back to my main point today, which is the sense of the despair that in which many of us live, especially in this past year, where things seem to be falling apart, things feel terrible. We feel a shadow of ourselves. We don't find meaning in our lives. That this is not new. This is what the Bible is talking about. But the Bible also has a deep sense of hope that a people in darkness can find light. People suffering can find healing. So the Bible has both of these ends of the human experience, the depths of the pain and the glory of the light. They have both of them. And I think brilliantly, because if you had a text that only talked about the light, you'd feel that you're not seen. It does not see your crumbling, shadowy self, but instead the Bible says, we see your crumbling, shadowy self. We have a way for you to recover from when your life has disintegrated, and how to pull your life together. That is my main point today. And I want to make sure that you do have a question or comment, only stay on that question, on that theme for the next few minutes. Yeah, Israel.
So I'm having a bunch of images. One is reaching bottom and 12-step, where you don't know exactly where to go next, and you can't go where you've been going.
Right.
But other times, just standing and watching a sunset, or being on top of a mountain or at the ocean, you just disappear, and you're
Yeah.
just part of it all, and there's no you. Or in meditation too sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's very deep what you're saying. You know, I have to share with you, and again, I don't know if I'm too Israeli because I'm so new at it, but I don't think I'm that different from other people here. You know, I know the Iranians have their missiles pointed at us, and I go out and I look at the Tel Aviv landscape, and I ask myself, is it all going to be here tomorrow? And because my porch faces the ocean, I look at the eternal ocean, and I look at the sun setting in the sea, and I think it's been setting in that sea for what, 400 million years. And I look at the water, and I look at this civilization around me, and I think of this stupid, stupid hatred around us, and I take it all in at one time. And then there's just this one tiny little human being, and ask ourselves, can we do a tiny bit of good in our time here? Can we at least do that? And it's like the whole thing is too big and we're too small, and here we are. So even though I'm just a Hevel, I'm just you know, a shadowy substance. I'm just a you know, shadow of God on a wall. But on the other hand, I am a human being. And, you know, for all our frailty, we do have power. And if there's any time to exert power as a human being, this seems to be what it is. That what you're feeling just now is what I feel every night when I go onto our porch. What are we supposed to do here? And then it comes down to try to do a little bit of good. Abigail, you want to add to that? My beautiful daughter sitting there.
Um, yeah, I actually just, as you know, Abba, I went on a spontaneous trip to Eilat. A friend of mine from my hiking group, she's kind of renewing herself, and she's divorced after a couple of years and just recently deciding to live life for herself after giving her whole life to everybody else. And she posted in the group that she's going to Eilat and asked if anybody wants to join her. I was the only person who said, let's do it. And she said, do you want to just go, the two of us? Because nobody else said to go. And I said, yeah, let's go for it. And it was the most spontaneous thing. And everything that one of us suggested, the other said, let's do it. Why not? And on the drive back, we drove through Mitzpe Ramon.
Mm.
And I don't know how many of you guys have been to Israel or driven through the desert, but it is absolutely stunning. There is something so magnificent about the landscape here in Israel. And I'm getting emotional. I did a hike in Mitzpe Ramon exactly a year ago, and I just posted about it a year ago on the Hebrew calendar. So I was thinking about Simchat Torah, because I was hiking in Mitzpe Ramon on October 7th last year, which is the 1 year anniversary. So I'm realizing that we're not doing the services tomorrow, thinking about the Mishaberach and thinking about the 1 year yard site of the Hebrew calendar of October 7th, and everything that I gained last year. We went through a horrible tragedy a year ago, and I gained a lot. I gained a lot from the experiences that I had, by being surrounded by such love and such support and such amazing people. And I've been able to really develop those relationships, and through the pain see how together we are. And I got to have my parents come and move to Israel since then. I get to be closer to you guys and know that anytime I want, I can pop over. And I decided that this year I'm gonna read every parsha all the way through. I've never done that before, but this is it. Genesis 1:1. This is the time to start. So if anybody wants to join me in doing that, accountability always helps. And Ava, I joined a really wonderful little study that we had, starting to go over the prayer service and the Siddur, which
Yep.
was really
Mhm.
lovely. So I also have my Siddur over here, and as you were
Okay.
teaching, I was reading through Ledor Vador. I went into the Amidah and I was reading through the words in the
And
Kedusha.
just want to remind everybody, on October 7th, when Abigail was hiking in a ravine, we couldn't get a hold of her for 12 hours because they were down at the bottom. And we were calling, and she was MIA. And we went through every level of hell. And then they got up that morning and came up to the top of the ridge, and of course all their phones were going crazy. And as I remember telling us, you finally got a hold of an officer who said, "Go back down. We'll tell you when you get the all clear, so you can make your way back to Tel Aviv."
Yeah, we were taken out with jeeps because we were really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there weren't power lines, there wasn't anything. And because where we needed to go, where all of our cars were parked, they weren't going to be accessible by foot. We had ended up having jeeps come and take us back to where all of the cars were parked. But I really I've been trying to take a moment and reflect on the past year, and it was shocking to me to realize without intention the commemoration, I guess, that I created for myself. On the way down, we drove on Route 12, which goes through a little bit more of central Israel to go down to Eilat. And then on the way up, we took, I don't remember what it was, or maybe it was Route 40. I don't remember what it was, but we drove right on the border with Egypt. And it was like the Mad Max setting. It was just stunning, beautiful, gorgeous. And there was a mist, a fog came over in the last day that we were in Eilat. And we were driving through, it felt like there was nobody else there, but we could see the border of Egypt. And I kept seeing these little guard stands. I turned to Caroline and I said, how funny would it be if we saw somebody there? And at a certain point, we saw someone on the Egypt side walking along, and it's just like oh, there are people right over there. They're just in another country. And, I was thinking to everything that people were going through exactly a year ago, that we have this beautiful, amazing country, and there was
Amazing people. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All hurting, all grieving, and all putting one foot in front of the other. And we're going to get through this. Yeah, it's an intense time to be here. So I wanted to share with you that this kind of sadness and this kind of, kind of heart-rending experience is in our Bible, as is the way out of it. So thank you so much for joining today. So what I intend to do is, starting today, I did a little bit of Genesis 1 to keep adding little parts, maybe going into the Midrash, and have this, over a few weeks, fully experience some elements of one parsha. And hopefully you'll enjoy that with me.